All right, this is part 2. I got a phone call and messed up my video, but this will be part 2. So I was still under the section of John Perkins, forward in Eric Mason's Woke Church, and where I picked off up, where I left off last time was talking about these injustices that that Perkins is talking about. He says he's thankful for the Woke Church book, okay, and he's thankful that Eric Mason wrote it, and he says no longer can we remain asleep to the injustice in our past and present. No longer can we afford to see justice issues as separate from gospel issues or from the gospel. And again, what I was saying in the last video was I'd be interested to see how this is really played out, stretched out, nuanced, because if they're referring to injustices as white privilege or mass incarceration, systemic racism, I want to hear them explain that, because I don't agree to any of those terms, and I want to see how they talk about this idea of social justice or the injustices in the past and in the present, and what those are, and what relates, how does that relate to the local church? Because here he says that we can no longer afford to see justice issues as separate from the gospel, and see, this is where the confusion comes in, because are we saying that let's say that we embrace, which I don't, but let's say we embrace the idea of white privilege, okay, that white people are privileged in this nation because of the color of their skin, and there's certain privileges that they are afforded that people of color are not. Okay, let's just say that's the case. What do you want? Like, what is the end of that in regards to the gospel? What does that look like, right? What is the end? Okay. So I'm interested in finding that out. But he goes on to say, he says, no longer can we wait for someone else to do the hard work of reconciliation. And I'm not sure, but what I believe Perkins is getting at here, because, and again, I'm not sure, because I've heard others say this, and this may not be his thinking here, but this is what it reminds me of when he says this. He says, no longer can we wait for someone else to do the hard work of reconciliation. In other words, and again, he may not be saying this, okay, but it sounds to me that he's saying we can no longer wait for white people to do this work of reconciliation. We need to make it happen, right? We need to make it happen in our communities, because no one's going to rescue us. No one's going to come in and rescue us. Now, again, that may not be what he's saying. I've heard people who are advocates for the woke church movement hold to this ideology. So that remains to be seen. We'll see. But my question is, wasn't this done by Christ? This work of reconciliation, wasn't that done by Christ? Yeah, that was done by Christ. Christ reconciled us, right? We've been reconciled to God, and we've been reconciled to one another. Now, are there differences in culture? Yeah, of course. There's differences between the Jew and the Gentile, right? But Christ reconciled them. And where there were differences that needed to be dealt with, it was dealt with. but they were never working from the place of not being reconciled and needing to be reconciled. In other words, it wasn't like Christ reconciled them to himself unto salvation, and now they need to be reconciled to each other ethnically. No, they're reconciled, period. Now, in relation, in life, where there's conflict and where there's disagreement or misunderstanding, then those are dealt with on an individual basis. But to have this, blacks and whites. I've heard people say that blacks and whites can't even have racial reconciliation because there's never been conciliation. In other words, we've never been together. We've never been one. And so because of that, there can never be, we can't start on the premise of reconciliation. We have to start on the premise of conciliation. And I'm thinking, listen, man, as Christians, we have been reconciled, period. Okay? Dr. Perkins, or I don't know if he's a doctor or not, but Perkins goes on to say, this is an uncomfortable book for some people to read. Eric explores the roots of racial injustice in our history and argues that the forces that drive us apart are still alive and well in our midst. Come on, man. This reminds me of a conspiracy theory mindset. This idea of, there was the roots of racial injustice in our history. And Eric Mason is arguing that the forces that drive us apart are still alive and well in our midst. What forces drive us apart? What forces are driving us apart? That's a question I have. So that's John Perkins' forward, and I wanted to share that with you all. Again, this isn't. I'm not going to do a full-orbed book review quite yet, but I think that it would be. I thought this would be good, helpful as an introduction. So I'm going to stop here, and in my next video, I will make a video on Ligon Duncan's forward. Okay, so grace and peace, y'all.